Welcome to Stranger Things in the 1980s. My name is Vince Locke. I am your host. In this podcast, my guest and I take deep dives into the Upside Down, where we analyze each episode of the Netflix series along with related movies and books and examine them in the context of 1980s America. In this episode, I'm joined by my friend and colleague Jason Szilagyi as we discuss Reaganomics and Poltergeist. Welcome back to Stranger Things in the 1980s. This week, I'm joined by my friend and fellow stranger, Jason. Jason, tell our listeners who you are and what you do.
Hi, my name is Jason Szilagyi. First off, thanks for having me on the podcast.
Absolutely, anytime.
Yeah, love Poltergeist, love Stranger Things, so it's perfect topic connection. I am a professor of history. So I do American history, as odd as it is, Middle Eastern history. I do a lot of that, so it's kind of fun. I love comic book movies, love horror movies and TV series. So this is just like right up my alley.
Absolutely. So the special topic for today is Reaganomics. You have some expertise in American history.
Mhm.
What is Reaganomics? Why was it important? And what are some of the long-term effects?
Okay, so Reaganomics was a economic policy put in place by President Ronald Reagan in the early 1980s through his presidency. And basically, it was along the concept of supply side economics, meaning that if you have more supplies of goods and services, that will drive the economy. And it's also a way of promoting free market. Instead of having price controls for things, you let basically the hand of the market control everything.
The invisible hand of the free market, as I can't recall who came up with that phrase.
Yeah.
Adam.
I think it was Adam Smith.
Adam Smith, yes, thank you.
Yep. Yeah. And that goes way back. That goes
Way back, yes.
Way back to The Wealth of Nations, the book he wrote.
Right.
And so it was a rather, to a degree, complex way that he was trying to put together an economic system where it would lower government spending. Part of that was by lowering taxes on corporations and on kind of the upper and some middle class, but it also meant cutting a lot of services.
Yes.
Like public education, Social Security, state hospitals. A lot of that stuff ended up getting cut out because that wasn't viewed as being necessary to the economy.
And as Reagan did say, the solution isn't governments. Government is the problem. So he was all for cutting back on large government bureaucracy.
Yeah. But at the same time, he's also putting in this huge budget of an arms race against the Soviet Union. And so on one hand, where he's cutting taxes and cutting these programs, the debt is actually swelling almost 3 times what it had been before he came into office. So long-term effects, we're still in the process of this.
Yes.
You know, a lot of unions were broken. A lot of the institutions that were set up to basically be kind of like social safety nets were trimmed back then, and they're still being pared back. And so we're kind of looking at it as, you know, while there was some economic growth, it wasn't really equal for everyone.
Right. And we're still feeling the consequences of those effects.
Yeah. Yeah, the idea of shifting, just like in terms of workplace, some places are saying that a full-time job is 32 hours versus 40 hours.
Right.
And then a minimum wage has really frozen compared to what the cost of living has been. So there's
Very
really,
much so, to the extent that most states have higher minimum wages than the federal government does.
which is crazy
Right.
to think about. But yeah, it's just, it's pretty insane. Uh, and one of the really kind of interesting examples that we'll get into with Poltergeist is, that Tom Freeling is reading Ronald Reagan's book, and you're like, okay, what is he taking out of this?
Yeah, we will get into that, definitely. So part of the whole Reaganomics idea is trickle down economics. The
Yes.
idea that if you cut taxes for corporations and for wealthy people, that extra money, that extra income they have will trickle down to the middle class and the working class beneath them. How well did that work out?
Not very well. Not very well at all, and it continues to still not go very well. A lot of what happened when these tax cuts were made, instead of these companies reinvesting in their people or reinvesting in their plants, in a lot of cases they were looking for ways to even cut labor more.
Right.
And so you actually start to see, this is where, not that it hadn't happened before, but you're seeing some of these major corporations starting to look overseas.
Right.
In order to basically get partners with different countries, and then
to maximize profits.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And, that idea of greed is good.
Yes, which is very much a mantra that you kind of see throughout the 1980s. And for listeners who don't know, greed is good is a line from the movie Wall Street. The character of Gordon Gekko, that's played by Michael Douglas, that is what he preached to his proteges.
Yes. And you could see that following through as well today with Wolf of Wall Street.
Yes.
It just follows that same, it's basically set roughly, after the events of Wall Street, but that idea that these investors are there to make money for themselves or their stockholders.
And they did make a lot of money.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did.
So even though the concept of Reaganomics is 40 years old, and we've seen through hindsight that it wasn't really very effective, we still practice many of these principles today for some reason, which I can't fathom.
Yes. It's almost like a nostalgia factor. It's like, it sounded like a good idea. And maybe if we just kept going with it, it would, I don't know, even out. And it's like, it doesn't really even out. It just makes it,
it doesn't even out.
Worse.
And so many modern or contemporary conservative lawmakers still go back to that Reagan playbook and try to recreate these policies, even though they've been proven to not be successful.
Exactly.
It's kind of mind-boggling.
Yes, it is. And we've seen that even on state levels.
Yes.
Where they cut all the taxes and then everything bottoms out, and they, well, this is supposed to drive the economy up,
right?
Down. It's like, it doesn't, one principle doesn't work. It doesn't, it's not none of these principles are magic bullets. It has to be a combination of things.
Yes. But complexity, people just don't like complex ideas. They want simple answers and simple solutions.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. Have somebody tell me what to do. And I'll follow that, but don't make me think too hard, because then it's going to hurt.
And of course, they can't really afford to think too hard because
exactly.
I mean, I don't want to get too political, but so much funding has been cut from like education and stuff like that, which trains people to think critically and to think hard. And
and then you see a lot of these free enterprise schools show up.
Yes.
And it's, each to their own, but in the same sense, it's like everyone should have the opportunity.
Okay, so you had mentioned one point of connection with Poltergeist here. Let's see how Reaganomics plays out in Poltergeist. So yeah, Steve Freeling is reading that book about Reagan while, rolling a joint, which I think is hilarious.
Yes.
And one thing about Poltergeist that really strikes me is how much humor there really is in this movie. It's not just all thrills and scares. There are quite a few jokes and laughs in here.
Yeah. Yeah, it does a wonderful job of giving that humor and horror balance.
Yes.
Where you're not completely overwhelmed.
Yes.
You know, and it makes it so you can kind of connect to these people.
Very much so. And I've read that when Spielberg was casting, and by the way, we'll get into talking about who did what in the movie in terms of Steven Spielberg as producer and Tobe Hooper as director. There's some confusion about that, but apparently Spielberg did the casting, and he wanted to cast actors who weren't as well known because he wanted the audience to be able to identify with these actors as, you know, common American people.
Yeah, without the audience coming in and having an expectation
Exactly
of these actors, of what, you know, what you'd seen them in before and how is it going to, you know, line up to this.
Exactly. So what are some connections between Reaganomics or even other political policies of the Reagan administration? How do we see those represented in this movie?
Well, I definitely see with the Freelings, okay, he's in real estate.
Yes.
He is, you know, selling 40% of, you know, Cuesta Verde.
42% or almost half, as his boss says.
Yes, and that's generations of security.
Right. It was, I think the dollar amount was something like $700 million that he had generated for the company. And that's $82.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just, you're sitting there and you're looking at that, you're hearing that. And on one hand, he's making all the money he's making a good chunk of money for this company. And his boss tells him, you know, I know we should have made you a partner 3 years ago.
Right.
And then how they're trying to basically buy him in is with the, you know, to get him to stay in the company is to kind of grease the wheel, so to speak, by giving him that hillside view in the new part of the development. But that whole neighborhood, it's, you know, when he's talking to that one couple who's interested in that he's taking through a house, he says, you know, we always say the grass looks greener on every side.
Right.
It's like everything. It's like it's an escape community.
Right.
You know?
And it's so sort of homogenized, and that house that he's showing those people is identical to his house.
Yes. Yeah. And then he talks about how the difference, the one difference is his neighbor who had the aqueduct from his bedroom to the pool outside. But just that kind of idea of you're pushing, you know, to just constantly develop these things. They're not even done with one phase of construction.
That's a good point.
And they're moving on to the next. It's like, you haven't even filled this neighborhood with families yet. So why are we jumping to this next phase immediately?
So yeah, it is push that economic engine as hard as you can and as far as you can, and maximizes profits as much as possible.
Yeah.
And that leads to cutting some corners.
Oh, yes. Yeah, some serious corners. You know, he's stunned when he finds out that, you know, the real estate he's been selling in the valley had been a cemetery before and never heard about it.
And his boss, whose name escapes me at the moment, but his boss is very careful to say, well, it was all legal.
Yeah, it was all legal, and everything was moved. You know, it's you know, 12 minutes more down the road. It's not that big of a burden.
Of course, the boss is lying to some extent, because as is revealed later on, they moved the cemetery, they moved the headstones, but they left the caskets and the bodies there.
Yeah.
So how legal is that? I don't know.
Exactly.
But the fact that that was made legal for you to move a cemetery in order to develop the land suggests a certain amount of lack of regulations or deregulations on the government side, which of course plays into Reaganomics. That was a big tenet of that political policy.
Yeah, that idea, if you just if the government steps back, in theory, the individuals and the corporations will do the right thing on their own.
Right.
Sometimes happens.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Not so much in this case, because what is the end result?
Well, the end result, for at least this part of the franchise, is the fact that the Freeling home disappears.
Yes.
And then there's the, I would say, the blowback for the rest of the neighborhood of trying to figure out why there's flames shooting out of fire hydrants. The electricity is shooting crazy, and a house disappears.
Into this vortex.
Yeah.
Right.
I can imagine that real estate company was not in business much longer after that.
Probably, yeah. So yeah, I mean, it does ultimately backfire for the company, and that's they experience these negative consequences. They're essentially going to go out of business because they had some shady practices. But also, it's really much a story of the past coming back to bite you in the ass.
Yes.
Because what happens is you have this massive haunting, which leads to child abduction and all of these really bad things. And it's all because you failed to do the right thing in the first place.
Exactly. And, I mean, you kind of almost, you want to know what your company is doing while you're working for them, because you should know, if you're going to be representing them, you should know what the business is.
Yeah.
And, I'm not going to talk about the other two movies unless we jump in, because I don't really...
Do they even exist?
Yeah, that's basically where I'm like, this original movie was perfectly contained.
Yes. And there are some flaws in this movie, and we'll get into that because I think it goes back to that division between Spielberg and Hooper. Yeah. But it's such a well-made movie on its own that it's, perfect almost.
Yeah.
The sequel's not so much. And I think it's ironic that one of the themes of this movie is being respectful of what came before.
Yes.
And then we have these sequels that look at the success of the first movie and basically want to profit from that success by beating a dead horse, more or less.
Yeah.
So it's ironic that the producers of the franchise, the studio, are failing to heed the warnings of this movie.
Yes. I think almost to a degree, a little bit of Reaganomics there. We have something that's on fire. Let's work with it. And,
exactly.
Get as much as we can out of it.
Yeah, milk it as much as we can. And those sequels, I mean, talk about diminishing returns.
Yeah.
The second movie has some interesting ideas. It does flesh out the sort of lore or mythology a little bit more.
Yeah.
But it just does not have the same quality as this first movie does.
And the third one just falls completely flat.
Yeah. So in my mind, and of course there was a spin-off TV series too, which actually had nothing to do with the actual story itself. So yeah, the extended universe of Poltergeist in my mind just does not exist. This is a self-contained movie.
Yes. It is completely on its own.
Yes. So let's talk a little bit about Spielberg versus Hooper. Yeah, Spielberg is credited as the producer for this. Tobe Hooper is credited as the director, but there's a lot of confusion over just how much control Spielberg had in the hand of directing this movie. And the general consensus is that he directed most of it. And I think we can see that.
Yeah, I've read quite a few articles and listened to some interviews about that. But they said that Spielberg was on set most of the time. Hooper was there. To a degree, I think Spielberg wanted to avoid like this, because he had the friendly ET and he had Jaws. That was the big break to it, was the horror thing, but then he kind of pulled back away from the visceral terror to it. But with Hooper, you have Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yes. So Hooper, for listeners who don't know, had made his name as the director of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was a wildly successful graphic horror film, independently made.
Yeah. And that movie, when it came out, it was just so shocking.
Yes.
When it came out, there were some theaters that wouldn't play it at all. But this kind of, it worked for both of them. Because Spielberg can have his horror movie, and there was a potential for Hooper to come out of that horror genre into something a little bit more mainstream.
That is true. That is true. And one of the reasons given as to why Spielberg isn't credited as a director is because he was under contract to, I believe it was Universal, as he was making E.T. And one of the stipulations of the contract is that he could not be attached as a director to anything else while that was in production.
Yeah, I could totally understand that from the studio's perspective, because it's like, hey, we're paying you for this, not to do
absolutely, especially for a different studio. It was MGM that produced Poltergeist.
Yeah, and just like now, the studios are incredibly competitive and
Yes.
protective when it comes to who their directors are, because they don't want to lose money.
Exactly. And for many, many years, Spielberg was very much connected with Universal Pictures. I mean, he did do Indiana Jones for Paramount, and he did contribute work to other studios, but he was very much identified as a Universal director. So if you look at his greatest movies, especially throughout the 80s and 90s, the Jurassic Parks, for example,
Yes.
all Universal stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Oh, I was gonna say, and that's the thing with Hooper too. He had, he did horror, but he did this sci-fi and some other serious ones.
But yeah, I mean, Tobe Hooper, I mean, even after Poltergeist did produce other work, not quite as successful. There is a difference in their styles, though. And can you see that in Poltergeist? Because I think there are some stylistic and tonal inconsistencies, which is really the biggest flaw of this movie.
Yeah, there's some differences in there. We're just starting to get into very, very, very early CGI effects with some things. There's a lot of practical effects that go in. And I can imagine, too, that, each of them had a different idea of what they wanted for the horror element. For what is it exactly we're going to see this Poltergeist? Are we going to see it, or are we just going to hear it? Are we going to do CGI, or are we going to do practical effects? And when it comes to that, trying to meld them together, it makes it pretty difficult for some of it.
And so you do get certain scenes like the ghosts coming down the staircase, which is very much a Spielberg kind of composition, versus Marty the parapsychologist tearing his face off.
Yes.
Which supposedly the hands used for that was Steven Spielberg. That was actually him performing that. But that particular scene is very much more in the Hooper vein.
Definitely Hooper, yeah.
Yes. And I wanted to ask you, what are your earliest experiences with Poltergeist? How did you get introduced to this?
Here we go. I was introduced to Poltergeist probably when I was about 7 years old, which is probably not a good thing at the time, but 7 years old, by my parents.
By your parents, okay.
Yes, they watched anything and everything. So they did like horror movies, comedy, sci-fi, action, whatever, they'd watch it. And so I'm sitting here, I clearly remember watching it because it was at night and it was a thunderstorm while the movie is going. And then I'm just sitting there, like tensed up. And then that, I have to say, was probably, it was into horror movies. It was just that feeling of, your heart racing and not knowing what's going to happen. And then afterwards, your imagination,
yes,
going a little wild as you're sitting there. But yeah, I mean, for me, that was, 7 years old, watching it at home. And then watching after that, just getting it slowly introduced to other movies. But yeah, when I was younger, I would sit there and watch Poltergeist up to a certain point, and then I'd leave the room.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And then as I, hit teen years, I'm like, well, actually, this is pretty interesting the way they did this. And that always kind of stuck with me, that idea that you never really know what happened in a place before you got there.
Right.
You really looked at it,
Dude, I've never thought about that before, but now that you mention it, that's going to haunt me. Because
sorry about that.
My family has moved around so much when I was growing up, and of course, I've lived in a lot of different places, and it never occurred to me to think about who lived there before I did.
That's just it, though. You're in your day to day, but sometimes, when you're just sitting there, like, okay, somebody says this house is 100 years old, or it's 80 years old. You're like, well, who lived here before?
Right.
And sometimes you could find out, and sometimes you don't.
And of course, you're a historian, so you're probably more inclined to think that way.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Trying to figure out what happened ahead to see what's happening now.
Right. Now, for me, the first time I saw Poltergeist, I was probably about 9 or 10 years old, so I was young too. I saw it at home. I didn't see it in the theater. I saw it, I'm pretty sure, on one of those HBO free weekends where they would try to give you an introduction. So for listeners who don't know, back in the 80s, when you had premium cable services, you had to have a cable box on your TV that let you go through different channels. And for the premium services, you would get the audio, but the pictures would be completely scrambled. So you wouldn't be able to see exactly what was going on. But to promote those services, HBO and Cinemax and so forth would have certain weekends where they would unscramble the picture in order to give you an introduction to that service. And so I'm pretty sure that that's where I first saw Poltergeist, is one of those free weekends. Now, like I said, I hadn't seen it in the theater, but my oldest sister did. And I remember her describing scenes from it. It came out in '82, describing certain scenes from it. In particular, the scene where Marty, the parapsychologist, tears off his face.
Yes.
And that image haunted me. No pun intended, but that image haunted me as a kid.
Just the idea where it's like, oh my God, he's disintegrating. And it's like,
and so I'm like, I don't know if I want to see this movie now. But, you know, of course, when I did see it, I really enjoyed the movie. It was very super effective. There are some really good scares in here.
yes.
But anyway, that's what prompted me to think about that, is that scene, which is very much a Tobe Hooper kind of scene,
Oh, yeah.
stuck with me even before I saw it.
Embedded. Gets embedded in your mind.
So what are some of your other thoughts about the movie? And what do you think about the movie? Why does it appeal to you?
I like the movie because, again, it's that idea. It's supposed to be the normal family.
Yeah.
With something so extraordinary happening to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then the question of, who do you turn to when there's something like this? You know, will anybody believe you? And just them trying to figure it out. You know, it's like this suburban family that, you know, in theory, in this time in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
they're living the Reaganomic dream.
Right. Very much so. The American dream.
They're in the suburbs. They have this beautiful house, 3 kids that, you know, the dad works, but the mother doesn't have to.
Right. Very much a middle-class American dream existence.
Yep. And they're doing the renovation to put the pool in the backyard. You know, and when it starts out where he's watching football with all of his friends, and the neighbor's changing it to Mr. Rogers. Again, if you guys, for listeners who were there in the 80s, TVs and remotes only had certain channels. So,
dude, when I first taught this class and we used Poltergeist, I showed the opening sequence, and that cold open where it begins with the TV channel ending its broadcasting and then going to static snow. I had to explain that to my students, first of all, what static snow was and why television stations they didn't broadcast 24 hours.
Yeah.
They just couldn't comprehend it, which, you know, makes sense because in their experiences in their lives, they've never had to deal with that.
Exactly. Because if the shows end, it's infomercials.
Right.
You know, for 4 hours or 5 hours.
Right.
But yeah, I remember it going off at about either 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and then that was it.
Yep.
No more TV.
Exactly. And so you would just have a static snow screen because you wouldn't, the TV itself, those analog TVs just wouldn't pick up any signal. So you would just get static on the screen.
Yeah.
Which is really important thematically to the story, but also it makes me wonder if this story could be told today in the same way. I know it was remade in 2015, which I did not see, but I can't imagine how they would do that because it is very much rooted in the 80s.
Yes, very much so.
So yeah, the movie begins with the American national anthem playing on the TV. And we see all of this patriotic imagery on the TV of, you know, the flag and the Capitol and so forth. And that helps to establish one of the really important themes of the movie, which is patriotism. And this goes back to what we were talking about in terms of Reaganomics and the Reagan administration. How else do we see patriotism represented in the movie?
There are some times when he goes to the university to find the to go into the psychology section or sciences section in order to see what was going on with it. there's that feeling that, you know, you're seeing the state flag, the American flag, the university's flag, but it's just kind of tied in because, again, it's that idea of this American dream. You know, some of the people who are in there, they have American flag shirts or hats while they're doing these things. You could see, you know, it kind of flows into it, but patriotism into capitalism. You know, the Freeling kids, surprise, surprise, of all the Star Wars stuff. What is more
conspicuous consumption is a big thing in here.
Yes, consumerism. And it's, you know, Caroline briefly mentions it when Stephen comes back after the chairs are up on the table. She says, you know, I want to go to Pizza Hut. It's as odd as it sounds. I mean, it's not so much in terms of patriotism, but you're seeing the things that are really appealing for the 80s, the things that you would
for Americans in particular.
Yes, for Americans that you would recognize. Pepsi or Coke, or, you know, the beer that the, you know, the dads are having while they're watching the football and the football game.
Yes.
You know, American football, not soccer, American football. And then, you know, and
we should probably make that distinction. Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those things where, like you were saying, it's so tied to the 80s. It's all things that you would recognize as a red-blooded American.
Yes. And then you have flag motifs in different places, or at least the red, white, and blue color scheme. Yes. Robbie, for example, is reading a Captain America comic.
Yes. Yep.
And then you've got that clown dressed in red, white, and blue. And by the way, fuck that clown, man.
Yes, exactly.
Why do they have that clown there? I mean, the kids surely do not want that clown there. Robbie is terrified of it.
Yes, he's terrified. It's like, if you're going to keep it, do it in another room. don't have it in their room. But that's another kind of excellent play on phobias and fears.
Yes. Yes.
Clown, you know, there's a lot of people who are afraid of clowns, but
in this case, yeah,
it's like, you're looking at it, it's like, looks like it's so benign. Yes. And it's not until the end of the movie, when it attacks Robbie, that its expression changes.
Yes.
And then it's the proxy for Carol Ann in the closet when they think that she's dead, and it's that thing. It's like, you're looking at it, it's like, that damn thing shouldn't have been there.
Right.
That was the start of this.
And there are, I've seen analyses of Poltergeist where they talk about how the clown seems to move because its arms change positions from scene to scene. Personally, I think that's more of a continuity error, but yeah, it does help convey a sense of there's something not right about this.
Yes. And with that, it's one of the things that doesn't get pulled in to the other side.
Yes.
Where almost everything else in that room did.
Yes.
And it's just it's constantly there.
Yes.
It's almost watching.
And it's there to help reinforce some of the imagery from the rest of the movie. For example, the fingers on its hands are very reminiscent of the trees, right? Yes. Especially that one tree that tries to eat Robbie.
Yeah.
But you make the point, that this plays on a lot of people's fears, including the fear of clowns. And it is said in the movie, and it's one of the taglines for the movie, it knows what you're afraid of and will use it against you.
Yeah.
So that helps to really sell that aspect of the film. Yeah. But yeah, fuck that clown, man. Ugh.
Yeah, that thing is never wanted, watching that movie, never wanted a clown down, not afraid of him. And just like, that's just his bad vibes.
Yeah, nightmare fuel. And it's interesting compared to everything else that's in those rooms, all the Star Wars stuff and Sesame Street. That clown was something which was never commercially available. It was something which was made specifically for this movie. Another dominant theme about this movie is the role of the female. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, with the role of the female, if we look at the family, okay, Stephen's at work.
Mm-hmm.
The mother and Carol Ann being in the house.
Yes.
And they're the ones who are experiencing this first.
Yes.
And again, it's kind of one of those instances of it almost plays to that almost stereotype of the women being marginalized.
Yes.
Are they imagining things? Are they hysterical with it? And the line that I love is when she says, remember, Stephen, just try to have an open mind. Like when you were younger. And it's just, you're sitting there, it's like, you're rolling through this and you're like, okay, so what are the tensions between these two?
Yes.
To a degree.
Uh-huh.
She's running the house, he's working to pay for everything. She has a closer relationship with the kids.
Yes.
And when at the end, when they're trying to get Carol Ann to go towards the light, to make her talk to them, and you have that feeling that the mother is the loving one, and Stephen is the tyrant, because he's the one who decides the punishment, and he says that's not fair.
And Tangina definitely asks, which one of you is she most afraid of?
Yes.
So yeah, the role of the man here is to be the authority figure and the guy who goes off to work.
Yeah.
The role of the female is to be in the home. But that complicates things within this particular story, because as we see, if you compare Diane and Steve and what they do, Steve, what does he do on his day off? He's watching football with his friends, fighting with the neighbor, right?
Yeah.
And she is taking care of the kids and
the house,
the house, but also dealing with issues of life and death, because we get the bird and the death of the bird there.
Yeah. And then how she's saying, you couldn't have waited until a school day, and then trying to hide the death of the bird.
Right. How did she do that, by the way?
She was going to flush it down the toilet.
Going to flush it down the toilet, yes.
I'm not entirely certain that would have worked, but...
Right.
Yeah.
But of course, the association of death and water plays out many places throughout the film. Obviously, with the swimming pool and the skeletons coming up out of it.
Yes. And also, the oldest daughter.
Yes.
She is absent for most of this.
Yes.
She's there for some of it, and then it hits that point where, the gust comes down, Carol Ann runs through her mother, and then the beast comes down and knocks everybody out and knocks the communication out. And then you don't see her again. And then that's when they decide also to get Robbie out of there as well.
Right. Yeah, she spends much of this movie staying with her friends.
Yes. Yeah. Hiding away from it. Again, it's kind of that idea of, if you don't understand it and you don't confront it, maybe it'll resolve
what
itself.
is happening? Right.
Yes. Yeah. With the whole part to it. But and again, that is an 80s kind of thing, because usually the older kids are off with their friends and the younger ones are left with the parents.
And what is she off doing with her friends? She's 16, and a joke is made that she's familiar with the motel.
Yes. And when she gets out of the car, when her sweater kind of blows out of the way, she has a hickey on her neck. So it's like, okay, there's, obviously something's going, everybody handles things differently,
right.
But that was her escape.
Yes.
And with Stephen too, when he stops going to work and, his kids are pulled out of school, then all of a sudden his boss and the agency are interested, because they're trying to make sure that he's not going to jump ship somewhere.
Right.
And maybe I'm being pessimistic about that. Maybe his boss was, actually really was concerned to it, but he's their best salesman.
Exactly.
And if they have to figure out a way to negotiate with him, again, that's another, consumerism. What can we give you to keep you?
Yes. Exactly.
Um,
and again, Steve is the one who's reading that book about Ronald Reagan. So we're meant to see him as very much that neoconservative, traditional family man, even though there is a very sort of liberal slant to this movie, because he's reading the book, but you can tell, he's trying to roll a joint.
Yep. And he gives it to Diane.
Gives it to Diane, who does it for him. She's a pot smoker. We get references to that in a couple places, especially when she's burying the bird in the cigar box, and Carol Ann says he doesn't like that smell. You should know they don't smoke cigars in this house.
No,
Why
they do
would
not. Or
that?
cigarettes.
Yes. Why would that smell funny? And we learn later on in that bedroom scene that that's where she keeps her stash, right?
Yes. Yes.
So these are people, early 80s, they're in their early 30s.
Yeah.
They're baby boomers. They grew
Mhm.
up in the 60s. We're told at one point that she is 32 years old, and yet the oldest daughter is 16. And if you
Yes.
do the math on that,
Mhm.
yeah, that it was an underage relationship and pregnancy there.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have these sort of baby boomers pre or post hippie becoming neoconservatives in the early 80s, which so many people did. But yeah, the role of the women in this movie, it's very much connected with life and death and being arbiters between the worlds of the living and the world of the dead.
Yeah.
That is foreshadowed very early in the movie with the situation with the burying of the bird, and the unearthing of the bird becomes a foreshadow of the unearthing of the dead later on with the pool.
Yeah. Yes. And then I always liked Tangina. Was awesome.
Yes.
But the other professors, the other woman who
Dr. Lesh.
yes, after they're done with the experience of, the beast rolling through, and then also the spirit coming down the stairs, and she's talking, they're apologizing to each other
Yes.
for how they react to the situation, and Dr. Lesh is like, well, I'm the most irresponsible woman my age that I know.
Right.
But she's doing something that, potentially would help other people.
Right. And the ways they react to the situation are very understandable and very believable. They don't have to apologize for it.
Yeah.
But if you look at who is most active in this movie, it's the female characters who have the most active roles. So yeah, Diane and Carol Ann, obviously the movie is centered around them, but Tangina and Dr. Lesh, these are the ones who are able to resolve the situation.
Yes.
The men don't.
And instead of, something happening and then running away from it, they decide to confront it.
Yes.
They're going to confront it head on, and they're going to find this little girl to bring her back.
Yes, as opposed to Marty, who takes off and never comes back after his experience in the house.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's a good dichotomy, actually.
Yeah.
He totally has a breakdown and just will not come back after that.
And Steve himself isn't able to really do much here. I mean, he's given the job of holding on to the rope and ends up dropping the rope, even though he says he won't, because he's so frightened and taken aback by the beast coming out of the closet.
Yeah. I was going to say, his relationship with Tangina even is very, almost, I would say, passive aggressive, hostile.
Yes.
Because when, she's asking him the question, he's standing there quietly, and then like, Stephen, answer her.
I am,
and I'm
in my
doing
head.
it in my head. Yeah.
Right.
And she goes, I just don't like trick questions. Again, he's already lost control.
Yes.
His house,
Yes.
quite literally, with this poltergeist, and there's nothing he can do about it. And now he's losing more and more control, and he's having an extremely hard time dealing with that.
Yes, and very dismissive of Tangina. He says, what side of the rainbow are we on now?
Yeah.
Making the reference obviously to Wizard of Oz, but also Munchkins, because Tangina is obviously a very short person.
Yes.
So yeah, very dismissive. And I mean, I think we can sympathize with him because he's always been in a position of authority and power, and he's completely at a loss of what to do in this situation.
Yeah. He's lost one child. He's trying to protect the rest of his family and trying to get that child back, but having no physical way to do it. There's the usual things where you would break in and get somebody back.
Right.
You can't do that. This is something completely beyond the ordinary, and it just shows how powerless anybody can be.
Yes. We see that loss of power on the part of the male and the power of the female being the ones who are like I said, the arbiters of life and death, and the ones who are able to accomplish what needs to be done here. This is very much a female movie.
Oh, yes. Well, Diane telling Stephen, you're the only one strong enough to hold the rope.
Yeah.
And Diane also telling Tangina, Caroline doesn't know who you are.
Yeah.
she won't come to you. I mean, that's that mother instinct kicking in where.
And you can make that argument that just reveals how intuitive women are supposed to be as opposed to men. So there's a bit of a trope there.
Yeah. And really, a lot of the times when Carol Ann is initiating contact, she's talking to Diane first.
Mm-hmm.
And then she says, "Hi, Daddy," after he says, "Hello, sweet pea." And again, that idea of who's more threatening.
Yeah.
She's
and even in the beginning, when they're starting to have this contact, Diane, as you say, says to Steve, "Keep an open mind." She's more readily able to understand or at least accept what is happening and what Carol Ann is talking about.
Yeah.
So she's more ready to believe what's happening.
Yes.
And note, I don't know if you caught this, but Jo Beth Williams, who the actress who plays Diane, gets top billing here.
Yes, which was incredibly unusual for that time.
Yes, very much so. And for this type of movie as well.
Yeah, because usually if there's a heroine, she's the support instead of the main, the main actor in it.
Exactly. Usually it is the actor who gets top billing, but no, she's the first person credited, which is very, I think, telling of the theme of the movie, and that it is about the primacy of the female within the story and within the family. There are other examples of foreshadowing, such as the trees in this movie.
Yes. The tree, particularly in the Freeland's backyard,
that
looks into the kid's window.
Which is certainly very creepy. And there's a point where looking out the window at it, it seems to have faces in it.
Yes. Yep. I always see that when it flashes through. And again, it's kind of it's that beautiful way that Spielberg or Hooper, whichever one,
decided
to do that. That was a perfect way to do that, because again, it takes something that's ordinary, but the fear is sometimes attached to, and it just builds off it. And the tree doesn't do anything immediately. It takes a while for that tension to actually break.
Right.
But that tree is, as far as I could tell from watching it as many times as I have, that tree did not have any leaves.
None of the trees do.
Yeah.
I don't know if you picked up on that.
Yeah. And when Robbie is climbing up, the tree is so high, it's so old. So it must have been there when the cemetery was first put in, that he could see over the entire valley.
Yes.
And he's seeing that storm coming in. And that's one of those, this storm coming in to disrupt, the normal.
Right.
And, he's in the tree playing around while his sisters and mom are burying the pet bird. And the first thing he asks is, "Can we dig it up to see the bones?" It's like, okay.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, even in that establishing shot during the opening credits, the camera pans across the valley and you see all of these dead trees everywhere.
Yeah.
So even though it seems to be a very green and verdant place, there's this hint of death, this undercurrent of death.
Yeah, and that one tree that's in the middle of the road that they put the lanes around, it was just like, okay.
that is a weird thing, I thought.
Yeah. And even the trees that were in the cemetery that they were talking about moving, all of those were dead too.
Right. That's very much embedding, or, excuse the pun, seeding the idea that this place is built on dead land.
Yes.
Another example of foreshadowing is the movie A Guy Named Joe, which is on the TV when Steve is reading that book about Reagan and trying to roll the joint. So A Guy Named Joe was remade. Spielberg remade it as Always. He remade it as Always. Basically, it's about a World War II pilot who dies and is unable to move on, so his spirit remains. So it is a ghost story, which, of course, is what's happening here. And by the way, I think it's interesting to point out, the movie is called Poltergeist, but it's not actually a poltergeist that they're dealing with.
No.
Because the point is made, Dr. Les explains that according to the rules of the movie, poltergeists attach to people, whereas hauntings are attached to places. And so they believe it's a poltergeist the way it's latched onto to Carol Ann. But come to find out, no, it is the place that is haunted because it's built on a burial ground.
Yes. And they say, they talk about how Carol Ann was born, born in that house, but that's the house that she was born into. And then as she's growing up, so she has that, as they talk about the life force being so
Yes,
strong, so pure. If these spirits are in torment because of everything that's happened around them, that would be a major attractor. But then it also has another twist to it. Her father is the one who's selling all this property to all these people. So in effect, regardless of whether he meant it or not, it's his fault.
Yes.
He has blame in this.
Yes. And I was going to ask, why is it the Freelings in particular that are attacked by the ghosts and not the other people in the neighborhood?
Yeah. That was one thing that we never really got a good view of the neighbors.
Right.
Because again, it shows us, they're putting in a pool. So they're doing excavation. Okay, is that the spark that finally causes this to start? Does anyone else in that neighborhood have a pool other than the guy who has the aqueduct going?
We don't know, but definitely putting in a pool is very much a sort of middle-class American kind of status symbol. So it represents that American capitalism, which is at the root of so many of the problems here.
Yeah. And then when it's going through, you're kind of sitting there like, okay, when they're doing the excavation for the pool, there's no coffins, there's no bones. At the end of the movie, they start coming through. So it's like, okay, was that a spot where there weren't any bodies, but everything else around it was? And then that's how the dead respond.
Right. So yeah, it's a little unclear, but it is again foreshadowed by the mosquitoes. So when Diane and Steve go to talk to the neighbor Ben to ask if he's seen anything unusual happening, they're being attacked by mosquitoes, and he makes the point of saying, well, I don't think I've ever been bitten by a mosquito, or anyone in his family has.
Yeah, he brings his son out and asks him, and the son's like, I don't know, Dad.
Right.
But so, they're attacked. When they come back in, all they're doing is putting calamine lotion on their arms and neck.
So that makes the point that they're the ones whose life force, the blood, is being sucked from them, which connects them with the spirits drawing on the life force of Carol Ann. The point is made, I think it's because Carol Ann was born in the house. That's what makes them the target for the spirits. And so the spirits are disturbed by the construction or the desecration of the burial ground, because it is pointed out that the Freeling family are the first to move in there, and that Carol Ann was the first in the family to be born there, specifically born in the house. So the spirits were restless, and they latched onto that life force of Carol Ann.
And then trying to figure out how to break through.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a really huge part of it, because that's even with the neighbor Ben. When everything is going on at the end, he's torn. He pulls Diane out of the pool.
Right.
But then his wife stops him from going in to help.
Don't go in the house, Ben. Don't go in there. Yeah.
Yeah, and you could see that he's conflicted. He is a genuinely good person the way he's presented, and he's torn. Do I protect my family, or do I help my neighbor?
Right.
What would I be bringing myself?
And I think we're sort of set up to dislike him in the beginning because of the fight that he and Steve are going through with the TVs. But what does Ben want to do? He just wants to put on Mr. Rogers for his kids, right?
Yeah. Yes. Nothing. Yeah. Again, taking care of his family. And
exactly.
And that there's always the idea of minor conflict with your neighbors.
Right. And that whole scene is rather amusing and comical and humorous.
Yeah. Where they're clicking the remotes through the window.
But that leads us into some of the recurring motifs or symbols of the movie, such as televisions. Televisions play a big part in this story.
Yes.
We see that from the very beginning, because the first image we see is the television with the channel going off air. we get, obviously, it's through the TV that Carol Ann communicates with the TV people, as she calls them.
Yes.
And we get a foreshadowing of that weird stuff happening with the TVs with that battle of the remotes, because they're each influencing each other's television remotely, unintentionally.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting with Carol Ann too, because she comes down when Stephen's asleep, everybody's asleep. And it's not the white noise that draws her.
Right.
It's not the static. She's hearing something.
She's hearing voices there.
And she's the only one who can hear it.
Mm-hmm.
And after that first contact, she's always switching it to a channel with static.
Yes.
Yeah. And
why do you think that is?
I think to a degree, again, there's that idea that when Tangina is talking about how the beast to Carol Ann is just another child, it's figured out how to talk to her.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's the fact that she is so young, that she doesn't have as much of the life experiences, that she didn't close it. She doesn't know that she should have closed herself off to certain things.
Right.
And so with her, she was sensitive to it. And once it understood that there was that sensitivity and there was that connection, then it just starts building further and further.
But it's only on the empty blank channels that they're able to communicate or use the televisions for communication.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's because of, to a degree, just the empty static, the void.
Mm-hmm.
It's a signal or electronic signal or whatever you want to call it that is just open.
Yes.
And anything can tap into it. And in this case, it just happened that, if these spirits are energy, the TV is something that's always on.
And the parapsychologists do talk about, well, there's things that could interfere with it, such as a car engine starting up or radio signals from space or something like that, because it is an open channel. There's nothing being broadcast on it that allows it to pick up interference from outside sources.
And again, too, middle-class family, there's a TV in every room.
Yes.
Save for the bathroom.
Yes.
But there's a TV in the kitchen and the living room.
There is the TV in the kitchen, which cracks me up because Carol Ann, her face is very close to it while it's on static. And Diane says, "Oh, you'll ruin your eyes that way." And she switches over to a war movie with a bunch of explosions and bullets going on. Like, that'll be better.
That's going to make it better.
But I think that's a really brilliant bit of storytelling, because we're dealing with channeling spirits.
Yes.
They're being literally channeled on a TV channel.
Yeah. You're not using a Ouija board,
exactly.
In the horror genre, that's something that always goes through.
Right.
Radios sometimes, that movie White Noise, that was a fairly decent one. But that idea that, there's that idea that it's there, and if you listen for it, maybe you could hear it, and maybe that's the only way they can communicate.
Yeah. And so, broadcast TV networks are referred to as media.
Yes.
So the television is the medium through which the spirits channel their communication and their voices. I think that's a brilliant detail. That we're dealing with channeling and mediums. Well, duh.
Yeah, and that's it's awesome because it plays into it too. The only person that the Freelings hear on the TV is Carol Ann, and she's still alive.
Yes,
she's on that other side, but they do not hear those other spirits that are there.
Right,
and that's the other thing that's so creepy with it too, because it's like she's not in there alone. What is in there with her?
Right,
and what is it that took her?
Yes.
And then how do you get her back?
Yes. And so you have to bring in the medium of Tangina to be able to translate.
Yes. And then you get it's only snippets. But when she's talking about all the things that are happening in this house, the fact that there's not just, there's more than one heart in this house.
And that's another thing, the heart symbol we see represented several times. And I think it's Dr. Lesh who says that the bedroom closet is the heart of the house, and Tangina says there are many hearts in this house.
Yeah.
Where do you see hearts represented?
Diane, a couple times, has shirts with hearts on them.
Yep.
When she's well, before it starts actually happening, just before it starts happening, when she's cleaning up the kitchen with Carol Ann and she spins around, then you see the heart shirt on her.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember if she has a heart shirt at the end when she's.
I don't remember, but there is a heart on her bedroom wall.
Yeah.
A plush heart.
Yeah.
There is in the opening sequence where we follow the dog going through the house, there is something on the nightstand next to Diane that is heart-shaped. I think it's a notepad.
Yeah.
So we have that.
Yeah, and the idea that, you know, everyone is connected to somebody else.
Yes.
Living or dead.
Yeah.
And when Diane is talking, when they go through the video and they see all the different spirits coming through, and you know, she's saying they're all alone.
Mm-hmm.
Question that I
that's a good point.
You know, do they?
They're so lonely.
Yeah, the thing is, it's like, do they realize that the other ghosts are there too, or are they? Because when Tangina says they're trapped in this nightmare,
yes,
they can't wake up from. Does that mean that they're to a degree all isolated from each other? And so, even though they're all part of this supernatural force, they're disconnected.
Yeah,
and there's that loneliness and eventually hitting rage.
Right.
That they're completely disconnected while other people are going on and growing their lives.
And Diane and Steve several times make a point of saying, I love you to each other, and I love you to the kids. So, and of course, the heart is representative of love.
Yeah.
That becomes a strong bond amongst this family. I think that's a really good point. I didn't pick up on it. That, yeah, the ghosts are isolated. They're all alone. That point is made.
Yeah. And so that, you know, the misery of all of them collectively, you know, even though they're, again, kind of trapped in their own little things, it just coalesces into this pain and rage.
Yes.
And breaks through.
Yes.
And then even when they're trying to escape, they're not going to let them escape if they can, you know, do almost everything they can to stop them.
Especially the beast in particular.
Yes.
Yes. So there is one central entity.
Yes.
That is very
manipulating.
Powerful.
Yeah. Everything.
Yes. Another representation of a heart that we see is a lamp on Carol Ann's nightstand. It's a heart's lamp being held by two hands, and hands become another prominent symbol as well. Obviously, the branches of the tree take on a hand shape. The creepy ass doll of the clown has those creepy ass long fingered hands.
Yeah.
But also we see clasping of hands, especially when they're trying to hold on to each other during the vortex at the end.
Yep. And then also one of the ways for connection with Diane and Tangina and Dr. Lesh is they hold hands.
Yes. And then we get a close-up of Diane's hand when Ben grabs her and helps her out of the pool too.
Yeah.
So hands represent a sense of connection here.
Yeah. And that you're not alone.
Yes.
And again, if these spirits are alone and they're ethereal, they have no way, you know, no touch, no sight, no smell, no sound, nothing. It's like, that would be maddening.
Yes.
You know, if you're completely disconnected from everything.
Yes. And so we have that heart lamp, which connects to another recurring motif, which is light, and the role light plays here. We see it both in positive and negative ways. We have the lightning, which happens during the storms. And so Robbie is taught to count after the lightning strikes in order to see how close the storm is.
As a way to calm him down so he's not afraid.
Exactly.
That idea of rationalizing the irrational fear.
Yes. Other examples of light?
No,
there's so many.
I was gonna say there's so many in this one, but the one that always sticks out to me is when Steven and his boss are gonna walking out of the house and Steven away from the piano that's moving and everything else, and then that outside light.
Having electrical problems?
Yeah, is that a 300 watt bulb? Are you trying to attract all the bugs? But that's really kind of, I think to a degree, that is the first outside sign that something is wrong in that house, that other people would notice. If you weren't in the house, you wouldn't think anything was wrong until that light started to go through.
Right.
Uh,
I mean, there is that wonderful scene where the parapsychologists come in for the first time, and Ryan says, well, I have a time-lapse video of a Matchbox car taking 7 hours to move 7 feet. And Steve's like, uh-huh. And then he opens up the bedroom door and everything's flying around.
Yes, and the light and that lamp is floating around, unplugged, and then turns on. It's like, ooh. And the lights flashing in the kitchen. When Steven and his boss are coming back at night at the end, and all these different lights shooting through each window.
Yeah.
As everything electrical in that house is going haywire.
Yes. We get a lot of strobe lights happening, especially from the TV. We have that strobe effect.
Yes. The ghost when it's coming down the stairs. And it's when you're seeing it, I guess you would say, with your eyes instead of with a camera, the camera that they're going to have. When it's coming down, it's one kind of big singular light.
Formless light, yeah.
Yes. And then when they are reviewing it on that camera, and it's all these individual lights, all these individual souls that are kind of wandering through alone.
And they take human form.
Yes. In the fact that the beast too, at the end, a couple times where it comes to the closet as the skull, and then when it's trying to keep Diane out of the kid's room, and it transforms into that kind of lion-eyed ghost. They did a wonderful job with that. Sometimes that soft kind of gentle light, which is like, okay, it's going to be fine, and then there's just this unexplained super intense light or strobing effect.
And of course, thematically, going into the light is important for spirituality and spiritualism. The belief that that is the way to the other side of the afterlife.
Yes, and that people who you loved, who died before you, are waiting there on the other side to help you transition. And again, with Tangina talking about it, some people just get lost, or
and they avoid the light.
Yep, they don't want to believe that they're dead.
Yeah.
And so to a degree, I think that's the beast. It did not want to be dead. And so it was using anything it could, including, to a degree, enslaving these other spirits.
Right.
To get what it wanted.
And the reason why they're attracted to Carol Ann is because her life force, Tangina says, provides illumination for them. Yes.
And it's a distraction from the other one.
Yes.
If they can't find the real light, they'll never pass on. That gives that beast control over them.
Yes. That's why they tell Carol Ann, go towards the light so she can lead the spirits to the other side.
Yeah, that her soul light, whatever you want to call it, would be basically shielded by the actual light.
Yeah.
And for some of those spirits, it might have helped with certainly with others it didn't, because they come back.
Why do they come back?
I think to a degree with them coming back, I think part of it is because Steven screws up with the rope.
Yes, he starts pulling it too soon.
Yes, because Tangina is trying to be the voice that gets those spirits to cross over.
Yes.
And she's only partway through that because Steven is afraid that Carol Ann will hear this and possibly transition. And so he starts pulling instead of just being the anchor.
Right.
And then that breaks that confusion, both, I guess you could say, in the real world and this other side, as
it kind of breaks the spell. Yeah.
They no longer listen to her. The beast it doesn't physically attack Steven, but it emotionally and psychically attacks him.
Oh, yes.
It tries to prevent him from keeping that rope. And if there hadn't been that other exit in the living room, would Diane have been trapped in there with Carol Ann too forever?
And that reminds me, when they come through, they're covered with that ectoplasm, and they have to be put into the water in the bathtub. And we have some very strong birth imagery going on here, which again goes back to the idea of the role of the female within the family.
Yep, and the idea of what Stephen's telling each of them is to breathe, remember to breathe.
Yes.
You know, trying to bring them back, and then, you know, the warm water in the tub, and how protective he is, because when he realizes what he did after they fall through that portal and hits the ground, he says, "Don't touch them."
Yes.
You know, there's that, you could see there's that pain and that regret that he knows he screwed up.
Yeah.
And he wants to be there to fix it.
Yes. But he can't, at least not until the next movie, but we're not going to talk about that.
Yeah. What's that?
Okay, so how does this movie connect to Stranger Things?
There are so many good connections with this, but the most obvious one, some of the most obvious ones for me, when his mother gives him the ticket to go see Poltergeist.
Poltergeist is directly mentioned in the first episode.
You know, and again, they're like, what, 9 or 10?
Yeah.
And she's giving him this ticket to go see this, you know, even though it's a PG-13 movie, but it's still pretty damn intense.
It was PG because PG-13 didn't exist at the time.
That's true.
How is this a PG movie? I always thought it was a rated R movie.
Yeah. I think this is probably a reason why PG-13 came in, because, you know, it is intense. I mean, you don't see a lot of gore, but it's that supernatural dread.
Yes.
You know, and then when
this is a pretty effectively scary movie.
Yeah. Yeah. And you don't, for the most part, you do not actually see what the antagonist is.
Right.
You hear it. You get the impression that they could smell that there's you know, a different scent coming in or whatever. For the most part, you don't really see what it's supposed to be.
Right. Not until the end.
Yeah.
But of course, you do have that fucking clown, and you do have that tree, which plays on some classic childhood fears.
Yeah. And then the closet turning into that.
Oh, yes.
And the tentacle coming out of there. And you're like, was that where Caroline was at? Or is that just some sort of, again, fear element that it puts in there?
Could be. It knows what you're afraid of.
Yeah. Another thing, again, when Will is on the other side.
Yeah. Okay. Will is abducted and taken to another dimension.
He's taken to another dimension that is, for all intents and purposes, opposite of ours.
Yeah.
It coexists in the same spot, except you can only cross over in certain spots, just like in that Freeling house.
Yes.
He can communicate, but only certain ways. And
through
usually
lights.
Through lights and through some sort of electrical impulse with the telephone.
Tries it with the telephone, but shorts out the telephone multiple times.
Tries it with his brother's stereo.
Yes.
He turns on the music. And then when the Demogorgon in Stranger Things is trying to find him, because it's trying to find him.
Yes.
It wants to get rid of him or capture him or whatever it is it wants to do. You, just like in Poltergeist, you hear the thumping.
Yes.
But you don't know where it's coming from. But it's coming from the walls or the ceiling, but not from something in your same physical location.
And there is one shot in the third episode, Holly Jolly, where the little girl is standing in front of the wall and it starts to come through in a very poltergeist way. And that image of the little girl is very reminiscent of Carol Ann standing in front of the TV.
Yeah. The producers of Stranger Things, they have done an excellent job of capturing the 80s. Not just the clothing, the cars, the movies, the books, games. It's all of it. They did a great job to it. And it's that, it is a nostalgia factor, but they're tying it in so well that you can introduce, if you have kids or people who have in your life who haven't seen some of these, say cornerstones of the 80s, the movies and things like that. This is a way to get them interested.
Yes.
Because they see it in the series and like, well, what was that all about? And it's like, oh, let me show you.
And another connection is when Eleven is able to channel or use the upside down in order to find people. She does it
Yes.
by turning the radio to an open channel,
Yes.
just as the
And
TV must be set to an open channel.
yep, that idea, and also the sensory deprivation
Yes.
when she's in the tank and she's just
Mhm.
completely isolated from everybody else. Also, the idea that in order to save Will, they have to cross
And
into.
Joyce is very much like Diane Freeling, in that she's at first the only one who believes what's happening, and
Yes.
she has to literally go to the other side to get Will, just as Diane goes to the other side to get Carol Ann.
And she also has that same struggle with
Yes.
everyone else. You know, well, we have a theory that Will was on his bike, fell, and then walked towards the, you know, quarry and fell in there and drowned. And she's saying that I don't know who it is you found, but that's not him.
Yeah.
And they just, again, that she is fighting for someone just to believe her or to help her.
Yes. And that does connect back to Poltergeist, because there was concern about Carol Ann sleepwalking and falling into the pool.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And then the idea of sensationalism, because that's when the parapsychologists first come in. Freelings are like, well, this isn't going to show up in National Enquirer, or, you know, something like that.
60 Minutes, or that's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. And that idea of, okay, we want help, but we don't want the exposure.
Right.
This isn't about a book deal or a movie deal. This is just about actually.
We're not trying to get publicity.
Yep.
And Dr. Lesh does make the point that this is no hoax. This is something which is genuine. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Any other thoughts about any of this that we talked about?
Like I said, I think Poltergeist is one of those almost perfect movies.
Almost perfect.
Because you do have, it is, yes, it's horror, but like you were saying, there's comedy mixed in there.
Yeah.
There's the relationships among all the family members and these outsiders who have to come in order to fix this. And I have to say, again, like at the end when the house is destroyed and they drive to that Holiday Inn, once everybody gets in the room, the door opens back up and Stephen wheels the TV back out and then shuts the door.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things where it's like, okay, did they learned a lesson, but we don't, you know, the lesson is for them, the family is more important than the material things.
Yes.
That had seemed so important at the beginning of the movie.
Right.
The house, the car, the pool, all that stuff it's nice to have, but it means nothing.
Yes. So they've got a new set of priorities now. And there is that message that if you're prioritizing the trappings of capitalism and the middle class American values, then you're prioritizing the wrong thing.
Yeah. Yeah, you're so busy trying to catch that goal that you're missing the rest of the ride, so to speak.
Exactly. So not only is this just a really fun movie on its own, there is quite a lot of depth here, and it's so well written and well made. Like I said, there are parts that are clunky. It's almost perfect, but it is still such a good movie. It's still very effective as a piece of entertainment and as a ghost story. It is still scary.
And I would really love to see them. I think they still have some of the footage that they cut. I would like to see some of that, even if they weren't completed. I would like to see what some of these would have looked like, and if they would have added to the story. Yeah, not just for the scare part, but actually give us a little bit more background for certain things.
There is definitely one part that was cut. It was the Pizza Hut bit, where Carol Ann says she wants to go to Pizza Hut, and then Steve says he doesn't like Pizza Hut. Pizza Hut objected to it, so they had to cut that part out of the movie, which is why there's an abrupt jump cut between Diane and Steve saying something in the kitchen, and then they get cut off in the middle of the line, and then suddenly they're at the next door neighbor's house. Yeah.
Capitalism. There we go. Sponsors didn't like that line, so it's got to be cut.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, there is extra footage out there that I want to see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. Thank you for joining us. For next time, the homework is to take a look into Adam Walsh, a very tragic story. The concept of stranger danger, and then we will look at the next episode of Stranger Things, which is the body. So until later, anything you want to plug, Jason?
I also have a podcast, surprise, surprise, a history podcast called History with the Szilagys. We do, my wife and I generally do little short episodes between 10 and 15 minutes where we talk about a different topic twice a week. And then we occasionally do deep dives on bigger issues. So yes, if you're interested in that, you can find us on Spreaker. You can find us pretty much anywhere where you could download your podcasts.
And I've listened to a few episodes. It's really interesting. Okay, thanks. Thanks for joining me. And until next time, stay strange.
Yes, stay strange.
Stranger Things in the 1980s is produced by Dreadpirateproductions. Cover art is by Sherry Archer. The theme music is Cobalt by Alex Bloxam, used under licensed from Filmstro. Send questions or topic suggestions to dreadpirateproductions@gmail.com.